Hi, everyone. This is Gary Bowers with the Williamson County chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas. We are about ready to begin our chapter meeting. We will start with a short business meeting presentation, which will be relatively short because we've all been at home. So not a lot of activities going on other than some of our online stuff. And then we'll hand it over to Mr. Steve Schwartzman. Sorry, I'm having trouble saying your last name, Steve. Schwartzman. There we go.
Good.
And he'll walk us through his presentation about nature photography. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to repeat myself one more time. My name is Gary Bowers, and I'm a member of the Williamson County chapter of the Native Plant Society. This is our April, I had to check my date, April 9th meeting for our chapter. So this is our normal chapter meeting that we would have. Typically we have it at the Georgetown Public Library, but tonight it's going to be online because of all of the CV19 stuff. And what I want to do first is just do a little bit of a warm up for everybody. And I'm going to start by opening up a couple of polls. So this is something that you're going to see. It'll pop up on your screen if you'll just reply to them. So we're going to start out with an easy question. And the easy question is, are you a Texas resident? So you can just answer to that. We like to joke that there are three types of Texans. There are those that are born here, there are those that got here as quickly as they could, and there are those that are born here and are really trying to get back. All right. And I'm watching to see how many people have voted. All right, so we're at about 85% complete. All right, that's hovering there. Yes, Bob, that was a joke. Thank you. Bob is one of our troublemakers. All right, so I'm going to close that poll and I'll share the results with you. So the majority of the folks that were online now and were able to respond are here from Texas. So then my next question is going to be, are you a resident of Williamson County, Texas? And so again, this is a little bit of an icebreaker. It's also helping Randy and Steve get an idea for who our audience is tonight. Okay, coming in, we're about at 78% complete. And as someone mentioned, please make sure you hit the submit button after you click on your response. Okay, we're hovering at about 85, so I'm going to go ahead and close that one, and then I'll share the results with everybody. So we're fairly split here. You know, from the group that we have, about half of us are in Williamson County. And then for those that are not, are either elsewhere or close by. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And then this is just for fun. Are you a Native Plant Society of Texas member? Okay. I'll give that just about 10 more seconds. We're hovering at about 85% complete. And it looks like, at least so far, the majority are. Okay, I'm going to close that. And I'll share the responses with you. So about 82% are Native Plant Society of Texas members. So thank you for that. For those that are not, be sure to reach out to us if you're interested in joining. We'll be happy to help you with that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, before we start the official meeting and I hand this over to Randy Pensabene to begin, there's just a few things that I want to cover for those of you that weren't here initially. Again, all of the attendees are in listen-only mode. You'll be able to hear myself, Gary, who's going to be the facilitator, Randy, our current chapter president, and then Steve, who's going to be our guest speaker. I will not be able to see your camera, nor will anybody else, and you also won't be able to speak. But you can ask me questions if you need to through the question and answer panel. Several people have found that already. And then one final thing is that we will record this session, and we will give that to you through YouTube probably later this weekend. As we go along, I'll collect the questions up, and then I'll present them to either Randy or to Steve, depending on what part of the meeting we're in. All right. Well, without any further ado, Randy, I'm going to hand it over to you to begin the chapter meeting.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Welcome, everyone. Like Gary said, this is our April meeting, and this is a nice picture. You have made the presentation. Share my screen.
I just gave you the baton. Yep.
Okay, I got it. So we're on board here. This is interesting. This is our first meeting, so bear with us here and there, and we hope to bring you an interesting program. I have a short meeting, chapter business. Our spring plant sale was canceled. Our main supplier for that plant sale is Wright's Nursery. She's in Briggs, Texas. Many of you know Barbara Wright, but you can contact her through Facebook and make an appointment. The plants that she was going to supply to our booth, she still got those and is selling those. So, but she is by appointment only. So if you want some interesting natives, she's definitely got them. We also, just to reassure our members, we do have sufficient chapter funds to run our business for the year. So this spring's plant sale is a disappointment, but it's not a showstopper. And then also to let you know that the board approved funding to develop this virtual meeting capability. So we're looking forward to having our chapter meetings online, doing a couple of field trips, garden projects, possibly in the future. Perhaps some classes, and everything will be announced via emails and blog postings. And a special thanks to Gary Bowers for setting all this up and running it for us. We really appreciate that. We had a lot to do. It's spring, so we had a lot of activities planned. These are just some of them that got canceled, unfortunately, and unfortunate for everyone involved in the crisis here that we're dealing with. But hopefully next year we'll be back on board. Field trips, we're going to do virtual. We did our first virtual walk on March 22nd. And that was very interesting. I enjoyed it. And Gary has plans to do some other parks, but we'll see. As long as they stay open, we should be bringing some of those to you as well. So again, you will find out about that through our blog. Upcoming programs, we are going to be contacting future speakers. Steve was generous enough to agree to do this online for us. I'm sure some of the speakers may not feel it's appropriate or be comfortable with that, but we'll try and bring you our regularly scheduled monthly chapter meeting with something. So it may change who's able to do this when, and hopefully we'll be back in the Georgetown Public Library by August anyway. So we'll see what happens. If we were at our meeting, I would have brought a tray full of golf penstemon for everyone to take home. This is a beautiful plant that's flowering right now. Goes really well with yellow columbine. Likes a little bit of moisture, but it's really not too picky because I keep my yard dry, and it does well here. And it makes beautiful evergreen winter rosette. So, and without further ado, that's our business meeting, and I'm pleased to introduce Steve Schwartzman. We've had him speak with our chapter several times, and it's always a joy to see his photographs and get his advice on how to do nature photography. So he maintains a daily blog. If you look at our post for this meeting on our website. You will there are links to his nature blog as well as his photographs, and I believe he sells his photographs as well. There's a link to his store for that. So thank you very much, Steve, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. I'm out.
All right, Steve, you should get a notification.
I just did.
Perfect.
All right, so good evening. You can see the title on the screen, and the presentation is mostly photographs with some intervening slides that talk about pointers for taking photography. And unlike most presenters, I am not going to read to you what's on the screen when it's words, because that's the only thing you can read is words. So you'll hear me be silent during the slides that have words, and if I need to say something about the pictures, then I will. I'm sorry that this isn't the usual live presentation in person where people can ask questions as things are still on the screen, but we'll do our best to answer questions and try to go back to pictures if you have a specific question about a picture. So here we go. I think you'll agree there's not a lot you need to do except aim your camera for this one. Nice Huisache tree with Sandyland bluebonnets. And I believe the white here was prairie bishopsweed. This was taken in Pflugerville a year or two back. I should add that all the pictures are taken in Texas, and almost all of them are in our local area. There are one or two from elsewhere, but I purposely tried to keep it local. Here you have our Straggler Daisy. And what attracted me was this funnel web, you know, those spiders that build webs that look like funnels, and the spider hides down in there waiting for something to move on the web, and that sends a signal and the spider comes rushing out and grabs its prey. This picture didn't include the funnel, but all the little droplets I thought were a nice counterpart to the Straggler Daisy, which is also wet.
And Steve, you do have a question from Jane Catalano. Oh, our question is, what camera do you use most of the time?
All right, I had added a slide at the end with that information, but this is as good a time as any. I happen to have been using Canon cameras since way back in the 1970s. I had an old film Canon A1, and in recent times I started with the EOS series. You know, they went through the 10D, 20D, 30D, and on and on and on. And I'm currently using the 5D SR, which has the big advantage of recording 50 megapixels. That's a lot of pixels. And one reason I like a lot of pixels is because many times there are things I can't get as close to as I would like. Either there's a physical obstacle, there's a cliff, there's an animal that it's going to run away if I get any closer than where I am, that sort of thing. And many times I can still take a picture and crop off a lot of the edges and have enough left in the center to be a decently sized picture. The two lenses that I use the most often are the 24 to 105 zoom lens, which gives me a really good selection. When I come upon something, if I want a wide angle, I've got the 24, and if I want to zoom in somewhat, I've got the 105. I do have a much more powerful 100 to 400 lens that I carry with me and weighs a lot, and I use it occasionally for birds or something like that. And the lens that I use most often is the 100mm macro, which can function as a regular 100mm lens. You don't have to use it as a macro, but most often it's a great advantage when you want to get very close to something.
Thank you.
Sure. I have gone on to the next text slide. So here you can see I'm at eye level with a copper lily, and I was aiming toward a sunny area beyond the lily to make the contrast between the somewhat shaded lily, especially in the lower part, and the bright area behind. It's an unusual combination, but I like unusual things. And you'll notice that everything in the background has lost its definition. All you see is vague patches of color and shape, but no definition at all, which is good because you don't want to distract from the nice patterning, all those nice veins on the copper lily. This was taken at the Riata Trace Pond in Austin. It's obviously poverty weed. And I moved around trying to make the outline of the top part of the poverty weed line up with that reflection on the far shore of the pond. Doesn't line up perfectly, but water proves a really good background because water doesn't have a lot of details in it. Sunflower, of course, with a big basket flower colony. Notice the contrasting colors here between the white of this plant, which is called false gora, the genus Stenophyson. And in the background, you have probably what were Indian blankets. Many of these pictures illustrate more than one of the points I'm going to make. So there's a certain amount of redundancy. You'll see pictures in this section talking about background that could also go in other sections, like cropping to make a very elongated picture to emphasize the shape of the plant, which is what you're seeing here. Goldenrod, of course. Although mostly in the Native Plant Society, we focus on living plants. As a photographer, I'm interested in anything that appeals to me, like this dead tree that I saw out near Kerrville last year. One of our great grasses, bushy bluestem. Here you have a Maximilian sunflower with those very interesting clouds. I didn't mention in the points that I made about minimalism, but minimalism is an approach where you have very little in the photograph, and that, of course, draws attention to what you do have. Sunflower. This is a recent picture from one of the last things I did before everybody closed everything. This was over in Smithville. And of course, the blue and pink make a really interesting combination. And I'll add a bit of trivia, which some of you may know and many of you probably don't, as I didn't until recently, which is that throughout the first half of the 20th century, blue was considered the color for girls and pink was considered the color for boys. Isn't that strange? Bastrop, with all of the dead trees out there, they make interesting photographic subjects, even if it's a bit sad for most of us. Now here, of course, in addition to the dramatic clouds, it's hard to miss that rock with all of the beautifully colored lichen on it and all of this coreopsis growing around it. This was out at Inks Lake last spring, which was a fantastic year for that area. This is about the most dramatic cloud picture I think I have. This was taken in Austin, right next to the Costco on 183, which is my neighborhood. Unfortunately, all of the native plants that were growing in that lot next to there are all gone because finally that area got developed with a hotel and a Wendy's. But for several years while they were about to develop it, I kept going there and got lots of neat pictures of the native plants that had sprung up when that area was left to its own devices.
Steve, I'm going to ask my own question on that one.
The previous one?
Yes, sorry, the sunflower. Okay. Did you use a light for that, or did you do some sort of post-processing afterwards?
You know, I don't actually remember. I'd have to go back to the original and look at the metadata to see if I used a flash. It could well be. I was wondering about the brightness myself, or it could well be a combination of a flash with processing, but I don't honestly remember.
Okay. Do you do a lot of retouching on your photos, or do you try to do them?
I do some. Okay. You know, this question came up elsewhere the other day. There's a Texas Wildflowers group on Facebook, and somebody was complaining that they thought it wasn't fair that some people were photoshopping their pictures and coming up with these fantastic colors and whatnot, whereas most people were just posting whatever came out of their camera with a JPEG, no processing. So there are different points of view about that. Most people object if you completely change something, like you swap out an ugly gray sky and put clouds that you photographed in Zion National Park instead, or something like that.
Right.
But almost everybody who uses the RAW setting on their camera, the RAW is something like a negative. It records all the data that the camera is capable of recording. And then you, the photographer, have to process it in Photoshop or some other program. And of course, you have to do the adjustments there. The program will take a stab at what it thinks is an okay setting for the raw file, but usually it's off in many respects. And so I adjust the contrast, I adjust the brightness. If something is too dark, I try to make it lighter. And people have pointed out that even famous photographers like Ansel Adams in the film days did a lot of processing of their photographs, of their negatives. They dodged, which is a way of saying blocking light from areas that were too bright, and burned, which is to say added brightness in areas that were otherwise too dark. So I do a moderate amount. Whether some would consider it excessive, I don't know. I don't go whole hog the way some people do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, prairie flameleaf sumac, which is a favorite subject of mine, but I happen to be out in the hill country over near Doeskin Ranch, which in fact I was there again yesterday, not seeing this of course, but the clouds were just great. I think those are called lenticular clouds if I'm not mistaken. They just added something different, because when you take a lot of pictures of the same subjects year after year, of course, you want to do something you haven't done before if you can. This is the white silphium or compass plant. And in the background, this was taken in Round Rock here, Bailiwick. And I was trying to get just the color of what was in the background. I don't remember at this point what the plants were, but all those little orbs of orange and red and yellow to me make a nice complement to the pure whiteness of the ray flowers of the silphium. One of the most common wildflowers in our area is the four-nerve daisy, genus Tetranurus. And I photographed these two with an antelope horns milkweed behind them. If I had my pointer, I would point at things like I would do in a live presentation. But the little disc florets on the heads of the two four-nerve daisies seem to have their echoes in the white flowers of the milkweed in the background. That's what I liked about this combination. I think this is one of our less common verbenas, the verbena xutha, X-U-T-H-A. But notice how in the background out of focus, you have another stalk of the same thing. One of our asters, Hierba del Marrano, which is the Spanish name for it, which means pigweed if you translate it. I don't know why they called it pigweed, but here again, you see all those stalks of the plant looking like a maze, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but I just liked the effect with all those crisscrossing lines offsetting the daisy itself. So this was taken in a suburban area of North Austin, I think it was. And if I had stepped back further or zoomed my lens wider, you would see a store to the left and houses in the background. So the key is to get close enough or zoom in enough that all of those things that you don't want people to see, all those human elements, are excluded, and what's left is just nature. Same with the Huisache tree. This is one of our little syrphid flies, S-Y-R-P-H-I-D, syrphid flies. The name of it is Toxomerus marginatus. This is one of those little flies you see hovering, and they seem to love to hover, and you just keep waiting for them and waiting for them and waiting for them to land. Eventually, they usually do. Called a tumbling flower beetle on a basket flower. Another point I didn't make in my text is that it's often helpful if you put the subject not at the center of the picture, which can be static, but off center. And one of the standard rules that you hear is the rule of thirds, where you are asked to put your subject a third of the way up from the bottom and a third of the way over from one of the sides. That's what's going on here, although I didn't consciously do that, it just happened. In this recent picture, it's from about 5 weeks ago, I think, on Mopac, I was trying to line up the bud with a wide open flower head in the background. And when I got close, I saw that these two insects, these two flower flies, were on there. So that added a lot more interest to the picture, but because they're so small and because there was a breeze, I took a whole lot of pictures and ended up with maybe 1 in 6 being okay, this being one of them. And that's another point I could make, that in the digital age, you don't want to be profligate and take a zillion pictures if you don't have to, but sometimes the circumstances make that a good strategy, because what have you got to lose? If it doesn't come out, you throw it away. You know, I'm a veteran of the film era where we just couldn't afford to take hundreds of pictures because it was way too expensive. Pod of a mesquite tree, which was interesting in its own right because of the curved hook at the tip at the bottom and the strange hole in it. And then on top of all that, ants were running up and down this thing. I guess they were going for the sweetness of the mesquite. And you may be aware that people grind up mesquite pods and make flour and bake with it. This is a new subdivision. The houses weren't even finished, but the streets were open. So I just went in there and drove around and saw that they had a retention pond. This is just off Mopac. And I lucked out because this egret happened to be there. And notice again the eccentric placement way off in the lower left corner. The plants are, I believe, Sespania, the genus Sespania. It's very common in our area to get close to a flower and discover you've got a spider waiting on there for some insect to land. This, of course, is a crab spider, and the plant is wild garlic. And notice again how I got in a position where I could get all that orange, probably from, it was either Indian blankets or Indian paintbrush, I don't remember. It's an American painted lady butterfly, I think. The plant is goldeneye, and these two bugs were mating, so that was interesting. Took this in Kerrville last fall, but notice how beautiful the light was in that final hour of the day. And of course, the colors of the bald cypress being in that warm range already just improved even more with that warm light of the setting sun. This is one of the few pictures I didn't take here. You can tell from the Ocotillo. This was in Big Bend a few years ago. I saw this great sunset and I just kept driving around, desperate to find some native plant that I could put in the picture to use the sunset as a background for. And luckily I saw this Ocotillo and managed to pull over and get out in time before the sunlight faded. This is at the Mueller development in Austin, one of my few sunrise pictures because I don't usually go out that early. This is our giant ragweed. You might think these are mountains, but I already told you it's the Mueller development. It was actually just sand piles during construction, but somebody, could be fooled into thinking this was taken out west somewhere. Mountain pinks. So-called old man's beard, Clematis drummondi. I was amazed at all the stuff going on when I took a close look at one of those little things. This kind of a picture you would have to have a macro lens to do, but many of the other pictures you're seeing here you can do without a macro lens. some algae in a creek. I was captivated by that strange, sinuous, dark bit of it. You may notice there are a couple of insects floating on the surface down near the bottom of the picture. I just found this branch of a tree lying on the ground years ago. I don't know what kind of a tree it is. Maybe some of you can tell from that pattern. Another basket flower. Pink evening primroses, which are out now. The banana-looking thing at the bottom is the sheath that originally encloses the bud. And when the bud opens, the sheath falls back, and I managed to get the now empty sheath lined up with the open flower. One of our great phenomena in nature, frostweed. I've been fortunate because I know where there's some stands of frostweed in my neighborhood in Great Hills Park. So every fall when we get that first freezing morning, I go down there and see if the frostweed plants have done their thing. And this is one of those rare ice storms that we get every 10 years or so. Just amazing how things look when they're encased in ice. And of course, for a photographer, this is a great thing to do because it's so rare. I see pictures online of people that live in Colorado and Massachusetts, and all winter long they're showing these great ice pictures that we can't do down here normally. Four-nerve daisy. Somehow that stem had gotten bent, but it did not prevent the flower from growing, and I just loved the form, the bending of that stalk. Smartweed, and the blue in the background was from pickerel weed flowers. It's a recent picture. I don't know what kind of leaf it was, but I was fascinated by the form. One thing I encourage people to do that I didn't mention in the text here is photograph plants in their various stages, including late stages when most people aren't very interested in them, but the dead plants or the dying plants often take on interesting colors and shapes. Gora. Rain lily, which are out now. Notice how abstract this is because I got in as close as I could and you don't even see the whole flower. But that's the point of an abstract like this. You just want to emphasize certain shapes, and the colors I thought were very nice. Another recent picture. You all know how green thread buds nod and hang down, but once in a rare while, one of them will hang down far enough that it can get caught and form a loop like this. And so I positioned myself in just the right place, I hoped, where the bluebonnet in the background would be centered in that loop. And of course, things are moving and I'm moving. So not all the pictures came out, but I did manage to get a few that were pretty good. This is the velvet or downy Gora. peonia, a flower that's native here, but that I don't often see. This one I lucked out because it was in a shaded area. I actually went up on Mount Bonnell last year and found this peonia flower in a place where a shaft of sunlight came through the forest canopy, which is fortunate for me. There's our old man's beard again in a very different guise. This is one of my favorite pictures. You have this bud of wild garlic, and in the back you have a cedar sage flower. The cedar sage is out now, by the way. I saw some this morning. Pepperweed, which is good to nibble if you like the taste of mustard. This is not the coreopsis we have here, but if you go an hour or so south, you get the Nueces coreopsis, which has those interesting red marks on the ray flowers. Our scarlet leather flower, which I saw a couple of yesterday. Here, of course, I'm playing the bright red off against the bright green leaves of the plant. And here again, it's important to move around. You don't want to just photograph the thing in the position where you first find it, but you want to move around a lot, looking to line the flower up with something pleasant in the background. Morgora with bluebonnets for an offsetting color. And here I lucked out because these two stalks had interlocked, which sometimes happen because they're tall and so they blow in the wind, and once in a while they'll get stuck on each other. In fact, this was right on Highway 183 near North Lamar, a place where you wouldn't normally think to go looking for wildflowers. This is not our common liatris. This is a species they have over in Bastrop. And if you're familiar with the iron-rich earth in Bastrop, I made that my background. I found that this was growing in a place where if I moved in the right position, I could get a big swath of this beautiful orange-brown earth in the background. And our beautiful grasses, even when they're past their prime, they leave, in this case, a skeleton of sorts. And in the background were mountain pinks that come out looking a bit darker than they really would to your eye because of the brightness of this dry grass. Now, that's another thing we were asking earlier about changing settings. The camera is fooled by things just the way your eyes are fooled by things. And if you have a very bright subject, then things in the background can tend to look unnaturally dark. Another one of our asters lined up with a bright yellow flower in the background. In fact, it was a Ludwigia, the species that grows by ponds and creeks that can't do without lots of water. Here I had the bud of a Nueces coreopsis against phlox, beautiful magenta phlox that you have in some places. This was autumn sage, and I was intrigued by that red against the green grasses all around it. It's one of my favorite basket flower pictures because you have a bud And in the background, you have a fully open basket flower. Another Nueces coreopsis. And another basket flower. What I liked here was the dark background and then that green across the bottom from one of the leaves. Also, the fact that we normally photograph basket flowers when they're wide open, but here was one that was just beginning to open up. This is Golden Eye again. The stalks of giant ragweed. I read in a book written in 1929 that kids in Texas used to pull these out and use them as weapons against each other, in their games like spears. One of the rare snowfalls we've got here. And so it was, of course, the right time for possum haw fruit to be out. Sycamore leaf. Lindheimer's senna. And of course, what I liked about this is that you can see all the little seeds inside like an X-ray. Also, you can see how fuzzy the plant is along the stems. This is our Engelmann daisy, and it has a propensity for the ray flowers to curl under the way you see on the left, and the buds have a typical pinched in look that you see on the right. Flame leaf sumac again. This is another example of minimalism. Notice even a spider can be translucent. The plant is our skeleton flower, skeleton plant. Virginia creeper. I really had to maneuver myself to get this picture. I had to push myself back into some bushes to get far enough back away from it and in the right place where the sun was in front of me. And a close-up of greenbrier, which is anything but green at this stage. I'll mention that I carry a mat around with me because I spend so much time sitting or lying on the ground, which I pretty much have to because that's where the plants are. An anemone. Another four-nerve daisy. This is a recent picture. It's not typical either because I hate normally shooting up into gray-white skies, which is what we've had a lot of lately. But in this one case, it worked pretty well, I thought, and gave me a very different sort of a view of a four-nerve daisy. Maximilian sunflowers. bluebells, including some that are close to white. Phlox and groundsel. This is a recent picture from over near Bastrop. It's more of the Sandyland bluebonnets with Indian paintbrushes last spring, the fantastic spring south of San Antonio. Again, a later stage of basket flowers. This was taken right in my neighborhood some years ago, Mexican hats. Unfortunately, the city mowed everything down shortly after that. Never came back in quite the same quantity as you see here. Notice by getting down low, I was able to have the cloud below the flowers, which is not how you normally think of things. You normally think of clouds being up in the sky. This is our native local liatris. Close-up of a leaf of buffalo gourd, otherwise known as stinking gourd, because the plant has an unpleasant smell. But notice how interesting the veination is in the leaf. I mean, in the flower. Another recent picture of a rain lily, and another exception where I shot up into a mostly white kind of a sky, but it brought out the nice veins in the sepals or tepals, whatever they are, of the rain lily. So that's the specific link on my blog that talks about techniques. And I've enumerated, I think, about 30 of them with links to examples for each technique. So there are many more things than I could show here in a single presentation. And this is where I had added the information about my camera equipment, which you've already heard about. And I'm not a stickler for equipment. I use a few lenses, as you heard, and one camera body. And it's not really that important as long as you have a decent camera. You can get great pictures with almost anything if you pay attention to what you're photographing. So I won't go through there again. So I am finished, as you see, unless there are any further questions.
Steve, I do have a couple of questions. Let's start with one that came through a little early on. I didn't find a good place to stop you for this. But Jane Catalano asks, since Adobe no longer supports RAW files, what do you do to keep using RAW in Photoshop?
Adobe doesn't support RAW files? I don't know, because they support my RAW files. I use Photoshop every day.
Okay. Okay.
There may be something I'm not aware of here, but I don't see how Adobe couldn't support RAW files, because that's what all professional photographers use.
Okay. Let me scroll down a little bit. And I apologize if I mess up someone's last name or even their first name, but Jamie Baxter Sly asks, have you ever tried the Nikon P1000 or P900 point and shoot style?
I have not. I've sometimes read about point and shoot or bridge cameras, as people call them. which are, I guess, a step up from the most basic. And you can get great pictures on those, but I don't have any experience myself. I had toyed with the idea of getting one recently because back in December we went to the Philippines, and I was not really eager to carry my usual kit, which weighs about 15 pounds on a long trip like that. And so I was toying with the idea of maybe just getting a bridge type camera that would be pretty good and that I could use. But in the end, I figured I don't really have enough time to get used to it and learn the ins and outs. So I'll just stick with a reduced kit of what I am familiar with. You can look online and find reviews of all these new models, and that would probably help you decide which one you want to get.
Okay. So Cesar Hernandez asks, and this is maybe a question more for me, but is the presentation from the beginning available somewhere? And yes, this meeting is being recorded, so we will post this to our YouTube site. Just watch our Facebook page or our website for details when that's available. It should be sometime this weekend. Jane did post a follow-up and said for her raw files, she uses a Leica M9. So maybe it's possible that they don't support those raw files any longer.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know about that. Maybe the people to contact would be Adobe and ask what you're supposed to do, or if some third-party developer has stepped in with software that can deal with those files, or Leica, contact Leica and see what they recommend doing.
Okay. And then coming through, oh, I'm going to apologize now, Alina. I'm not going to butcher your last name. But question is, do you ever move the flowers to have a more powerful background, or do you prefer to use the backgrounds around the plants where they grow naturally?
No, I prefer to do them where they are. Like I say, I move around a lot, and I'm not adverse to holding a plant and moving it slightly to make it line up better with what I want it to line up with. But no, I know people who will cut a flower and take it home and put it in a light box and photograph it that way, but I don't do that.
Okay. And then, sorry, I skipped over this one. Becky just had a comment, Becky Sloan, that she had taken some pretty great photos with using her iPhone. And I guess
yeah, so have I.
Right.
I mean, it's most of us have our phones with us most of the time, which we can't say is true for our cameras.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can get great pictures on a phone.
So that saying, the best camera is the one that you have on you.
Exactly. One thing I'll mention about phone cameras, just to keep in mind, is they're not great for blurring backgrounds. They're made with very, very short focal lengths because they're so tiny. And so typically everything is in focus when you take a picture with a phone camera. And if that works in your favor, fine. But a lot of the techniques I was talking about here, where you don't have a sharp background, would be hard to duplicate with a phone camera.
Okay. The what I'll follow up on that with is a lot of the phones, including the iPhone and some of the higher level Android phones, is they have something called portrait mode now, and they will use software to blur the backgrounds so it can detect what your primary focus is. And I think that was Becky's point that she had a follow up on, to use portrait mode.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll have to check that out too.
Okay, and then last thing here would be submissions for the photo contest. Do you know when those submissions open, or should we just be watching the nipsat.org webpage?
Yeah, I don't know. Typically, they've been later in the year. And given the situation now, I have no idea what the people in charge are going to do. It seems to me the contest is something that could happen regardless of whether there's an annual meeting like there usually is to coincide with the announcement of the contest winners. I mean, we're far enough away from the fall that things could change and we could be back to semi-normal. But I'll encourage the powers that be to hold the contest, since it's all done digitally anyhow. There's no reason not to hold the contest.
Okay, looks like we have Bill Hopkins on, and he just posted a note to say, look for an announcement on the website. So that website is npsot.org, npsot.org. And then for our chapter, we'll also post when we see that announcement come through. So you can either watch our Facebook page or our website. And for those of you that have provided the feedback and the thanks for holding this, you are most welcome, and we're very glad that you're able to join us. So I think that's it on the questions that have come through. I apologize if I missed anybody. Steve or Randy, any final thoughts?
No, I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I appreciate your sitting with us tonight, Steve, and Gary hosting. So thank you both very much.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out this way. I would, of course, have preferred to be there in person, because when you interact with a live audience, it's not the same as doing it digitally. But and I taught for many years, so I'm used to interacting and having people pop up in the middle of things with questions that need to be answered, based on a picture that's on the screen, and I'm used to using a pointer and pointing out stuff in the pictures. So for all those reasons, I would rather have done it live, but I'm glad at least it worked this way, which is not bad.
No, that was great. It was really nice to be so close to the screen, at least for me. Sometimes it's hard to see you when you're in the meeting room and the projector's going, or the projector has that weird green tint to it, and you're like, oh, these all look terrible.
Yeah.
That's true, and you bring up a good point, because I'm always dissatisfied when I show my pictures with one of those projectors, because the quality is lacking, whereas here it's as good as what you would see on your screen normally.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so for all the attendees, thank you so much. We really appreciated you joining us this evening. When I end the meeting, you will get a survey. You can either complete that as soon as it pops up on your screen, or you can do that in the follow-up email. That'll be sent out automatically by the system. And watch our Facebook page, watch our website for next month's meeting. And then unfortunately the parks are closed this weekend, was when I was thinking that I would get by and be able to do one of the walks, but everything shut down for Easter, probably because there were a lot of people like me thinking, oh, I'll go to the park during that weekend. So hopefully we'll be able to do one of our virtual walks again. But you can also check out our YouTube and see the one that we did at Berry Springs if you weren't able to see that. So again, Steve, thanks so much for sharing your photos and your thoughts with us this evening.
Yes.
My pleasure.
All right, and thank you, Randy, for going through our business meeting with us.
All right.
And with that, good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Good night.